Charlemagne, the sword and the crown of the Frankish Empire in the closing years of the 8th century and the dawn of the 9th, Europe was a land of shifting alliances, scattered kingdoms, and fading glory from a bygone Roman era. Into this world of warring tribes and rising powers stepped a man who would shape the destiny of an entire continent, Charles, known to history as Charlemagne or Charles the Great. His story is not just one of battles and crowns, but of vision, transformation, and a dream of unity across Europe. Charlemagne was born around the year 742 AD, the son of Deschamps the Short, the first king of the Franks from the Carolingian line, and Bertrada of Laon. From the start, his life was tied to power and destiny. The Franks were a Germanic people whose lands lay across what is now France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Western Germany. Under Pepin, they had already risen above other Frankish nobles and had established themselves as a dominant force in Western Europe. But Charlemagne would take that influence far beyond anything his father had imagined. Early life and rise to power, Charles grew up in a time of constant warfare and shifting alliances. From his youth, he was trained to be a warrior and leader. He learned to ride horses, master weapons, and read Latin, the language of the church and scholarship. Very early in life, he showed extraordinary intelligence, physical strength, and a deep sense of duty to both God and his people. When Pepin died in 768 AD, the Frankish kingdom was divided between Charles and his younger brother Charlemagne, as per Frankish tradition. This arrangement, however, did not last long. Charlemagne died suddenly in 771 AD, leaving Charles as the sole ruler of the Frankish lands. Some whispers among nobles hinted at rivalry and possible intrigue, but in the end, Charles inherited full control. With this power, he began a series of military campaigns that would expand his realm and forge his legacy. Wars of conquest and expansion. Charlemagne's reign was marked by nearly constant military activity. His first major challenges came from the Saxons, a fierce Germanic tribe in the northeast. For more than 3 decades, from 772 to 804, Charlemagne waged a campaign to bring the Saxons under Frankish control and convert them to Christianity. These wars were brutal. The Saxons, fighting to protect their homeland and pagan traditions, struck back time and again. Charlemagne responded with force and sometimes with harsh measures. In one infamous decree, he ordered the death of thousands of Saxons who refused to convert, a moment that remains controversial among historians. Yet despite the bloodshed, eventually the Saxons were subdued and absorbed into the Frankish realm. While the Saxon wars raged, Charlemagne also campaigned in other directions. In the south, he fought against the Lombards in northern Italy. The Lombards had long been a thorn in the side of both the Franks and the papacy. In 774 AD, Charlemagne defeated them and took the title of King of the Lombards, further expanding his influence. To the west, he pushed his authority into what is now Spain, crossing the Pyrenees to confront the Muslim rulers who held parts of the Iberian Peninsula. Although these campaigns met with mixed success, they held back Muslim advances and established a buffer zone known as the Spanish March, protecting his empire's southern frontier. A new Europe and the crown of Empire. Charlemagne's greatest achievement, and the one that ensured his name would echo through history, came not from war alone but from his vision of a revived Christian Europe. In 800 AD, during the Christmas Day service at St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, Charlemagne knelt before Pope Leo III, seeking blessings for his rule. To his surprise and delight, the Pope placed a crown upon his head and proclaimed him Emperor of the Romans. This moment was symbolic and revolutionary. The Western Roman Empire had fallen more than 3 centuries earlier, in 476 AD, leaving a vacuum that many believed could never be filled. But here, in a small basilica in Rome, a Frankish king was crowned emperor, reviving, at least in name, the idea of a unified Christian Roman world. This coronation sent ripples across Europe and Asia, signaling the birth of what later generations would call the Holy Roman Empire. For Charlemagne, the title of emperor meant more than prestige. It was a declaration of responsibility, to protect the church, uphold justice, cultivate learning, and rule with wisdom. And he set about fulfilling that responsibility with unmatched energy, Reform and Renaissance, Charlemagne was not just a warrior. He was a reformer and a patron of learning. His court became a vibrant center of culture and intellectual revival in a period often unfairly labeled as the Dark Ages. He gathered scholars from across Europe, including the English monk Alcuin of York, to create a renaissance of learning and literacy under Charlemagne's direction. Monasteries and schools began to teach not only religious studies, but also grammar, rhetoric, and arithmetic. Manuscripts were copied and preserved, Latin was standardized, laws were codified. Charlemagne even took part in these discussions, asking questions and showing genuine interest in knowledge. He believed a wise ruler must be educated and that his subjects should be able to read the scriptures. To this end, he initiated reforms in church practices, insisting on clearer liturgy and better training for clergy. His reforms strengthened the unity of his realms by connecting political authority with Christian ideals. Administration of the empire. Charlemagne's empire was vast, stretching from the North Sea to northern Italy, and from the Atlantic coast to the borders of Bavaria and Saxony. Governing such a domain was a challenge. To manage it, he divided the empire into regions called counties, each overseen by a count responsible for justice, defense, and tax collection. To maintain communication and loyalty, Charlemagne appointed special envoys known as missi dominici, messengers of the Lord Ruler. These officials traveled throughout the realm to ensure the counts were enforcing laws fairly and remained faithful to the emperor. Such organizations strengthened central authority and helped reduce corruption and rebellion. Charlemagne understood that peace, stability, and fairness were just as vital to his legacy as military might. Faith and legacy. Charlemagne's reign was deeply tied to Christian faith. He believed God had chosen him to defend and spread Christianity. This belief guided his wars against pagan peoples and his support for the church. But this alliance with religion also had complex consequences. While he baptized thousands of conquered peoples, sometimes by force, his actions blended spiritual intent with political necessity, a tension that would shape European history for centuries. In his later years, Charlemagne's health began to decline, though his energy seemed inexhaustible until the end. He continued to hold councils, issue decrees, and travel throughout his empire. In 814 AD, at the age of around 72, Charlemagne died in the city of Aachen, his beloved capital. He was buried there in the grand cathedral he had built, a testament to his life's work. After Charlemagne's death left a void. His empire did not remain unified for long. His son, Louis the Pious, inherited the throne but struggled to maintain the cohesion and discipline his father had forged. After Louis's death, Charlemagne's grandsons divided the empire among themselves through the Treaty of Verdun in 843 AD, fragmenting the realm into what would become the foundations of modern France, Germany, and other European states. Yet even in division, Charlemagne's influence endured. His vision of a unified Christian Europe shaped medieval politics and inspired rulers for generations. Scholars look back on his reign as a turning point in European history, a moment when the ruins of Rome gave way to new kingdoms and a sense of shared heritage. Remembering Charlemagne's legacy is vast and complex. To some, he was a heroic unifier, a promoter of learning, and a father of Europe. To others, he was a conqueror whose wars brought suffering. Yet almost all agree that he was one of the most powerful and transformative figures of the early Middle Ages. Through wars and governance, reforms and dreams, Charlemagne stood at the crossroads between the ancient world and medieval Europe. His empire may have fractured, but his ideas of leadership, learning, and unity lived on. In crowns and churches, in law codes and schoolhouses, the spirit of Charlemagne echoed throughout the centuries.